Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us for today's webinar, A Clear Path to Being Well Architected on AWS. Our goal for this webinar is for you to leave with a single actionable insight, which is how can you know how to get to a better state with your AWS workloads in all areas of the well-architected framework. We'll talk about what the framework is, how each pillar of the framework benefits you, and at the end of this webinar, we're going to tell you how you can get a free well-architected review that'll provide immediate value to your business. I'm joined today by Anil, who's going to lead a lot of this conversation. Anil?
Hi, everyone. Neil Bedard. I'm a principal solution architect here at Saline Consulting. Been in the AWS ecosystem now for almost 10 plus years. I've been doing well-architected reviews this entire time. I'm happy to talk to you, Adam, and happy to talk to everyone about how to get well-architected in their AWS environment.
So Anil, the well-architected framework may be new to some of the folks here today, so I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Adam. The well-architected framework was defined by AWS about 12 years ago as a way for businesses who are running their workloads in AWS to know whether their workloads provide the maximum amount of business value. As it stands today, it's gone through quite a few revisions, and there are currently 6 pillars of the AWS well-architected framework. There's operational excellence, security, performance, reliability, cost optimization, and most recently added sustainability.
Anil, let's talk about each of these individually and let our viewers know what they can expect from each of these pillars.
Sure. So let's start off with security. Security, you'll often hear at AWS being referred to as Job Zero.
Yep.
Going over the security pillar of the well-architected framework describes how well do you align to the best practices that have been defined in the well-architected framework as it relates to security. So the well-architected framework review looks at things from network security, data security, identity and access management, and basically does a pretty thorough review of how you're managing security and what trade-offs you've considered when deciding on your security posture.
So is this going to essentially provide our customers with some red flags like, okay, you need to make sure that this best practice is in place based on your workload? And I think it's important to note that the well-architected framework isn't necessarily meant for your entire AWS account. Is that correct? It's just for individual workloads?
Correct. So while the pillars, there's many aspects of the pillar that will look at things from an organizational element.
Yeah.
There are quite a few best practices that relate specifically to a workload.
Okay.
A great example of that is looking at your S3 buckets and identifying anything that's public facing.
Right.
There's oftentimes a use case that makes sense for an S3 bucket to be public facing, but there may be an organizational standard against having everything being public facing. So
Right.
having those organizational
Just in
standards.
case somebody's gone in and clicked that button that, lets everything be exposed to the world, this will essentially throw up some red flags to make you at least look at that and make a decision if you haven't already done so. So
Exactly.
security wise, it's going to be able to give you those insights pretty quickly and secure your workload, to the best possible way.
Exactly. And it also gives you an opportunity to be able to ask that question in a different way to say, is there a better way of doing this than making data publicly accessible?
Gotcha. Okay. So is the well-architected framework going to provide recommendations for the things that it notices?
Correct. When we do our well-architected reviews, we align and identify high-risk issues, but also provide recommendations on how to remediate them. When we do these reviews, we don't just kind of run a scan. We actually have a conversation with you about what your intent is about the workload, and we help contextualize those findings. So while a best practice may be to not have public S3 buckets, we'll be able to come in and say whether that's something that's needed for that particular workload or not, and what other options you have to actually solve the use case that you're trying to do.
Okay. From your experience with security specifically, are the customers that you work with throughout your career, are they generally surprised by what they find in the security area?
More often than not, there's a lot. Oftentimes, customers feel like they are operating in a secure baseline, but operating in AWS does have its share of challenges, and one of them being that there are a lot of different avenues to consider when looking at security. So oftentimes, things that might have seemed trivial or irrelevant at the time sometimes have turned into a larger issue. And so I think doing these reviews and doing them periodically will help you understand not just where you stand at a current point in time, but where you stand, over the life of the workload.
Gotcha. I read somewhere that I think it was an IBM report said that organizations that have a mature cloud security practice save an average of like $1.5 million or something like that in breach costs compared to those who don't have that stance. And so, I think this is one of the pillars that our clients generally resonate with first, right? Which is probably what we're talking about at first. But I mean, this can have a huge impact on your business, obviously. So, it's, and I will point out that, these reviews, which we'll talk about later, but these reviews don't take too long to perform. I mean, there's an aspect of them that's an interview. It's a conversational to basically evaluate your best practices, but we also run some scans that will bring them forward and allow you to see them in an organized way. So this one is definitely huge and one that we try to focus very, very specifically on early on.
Absolutely. Absolutely. The automation that we have allows us to come into those interviews with questions specifically to your environment as opposed to just wide open questions and, spend a lot of time, ideating.
Yeah. Let's talk about everybody's second favorite topic, cost optimization. I guess it could be everybody's first favorite, depending on who you talk to, but let's talk about that pillar.
Yeah. So the cost optimization pillar is a unique aspect because it really forces us to have a conversation about how multiple parts of the business are talking to each other and understanding the cost of running a workload inside of AWS, as well as looking at what services, what technologies, what solutions are being run as a part of that workload, and are they being run in the most cost-effective manner. So it kind of comprises of, you understand a little bit of the accounting, so to speak, to be able to understand, okay, how are you planning for spend? How are you planning your budgets? How are you forecasting? But also, are you taking advantage of the elasticity of the cloud? Are you taking advantage of being able to turn things on and off? Are you being able to, take advantage of auto-scaling groups? And all of those have a factor in what your final cost looks like.
Right. So a good example of that is that within our MSP that we run for a lot of our clients, because of the cloud, we're able to build in these things, basically schedules that clients can take advantage of by default to, imagine some of our clients are 9 to 5, right? So from outside of those areas, outside of those timeframes, many areas of their business aren't running. So there's a great opportunity there outside of 9 to 5 to save, right? So we're talking about something significant, especially in high intensive workloads that have a lot of resources attached to them. There's opportunities there to cost optimize. And again, this is something that our clients will want to focus on, and rightfully so, right? It's a very high impact area, something that we can get to. Usually it's low hanging fruit. And speaking back to the nature of the review, again, we can come forward with these indicators pretty quickly, right? So I really want to show our viewers at some point maybe a dashboard of what they would get from one of these reviews. But again, a lot of customers or people that are running cloud workloads are wasting up to a third of their costs that they're spending. Something I saw recently was that a lot of them just don't know what needs to be running, when it needs to be running, what the opportunities for savings are. And if you think about a third of your bill on AWS, it can be extremely significant. Again, could be millions for some, but the bottom line is that it's impactful for all cloud customers and something that they can take advantage of pretty quickly with a review.
Absolutely. And going back to being able to look at these things periodically, as AWS comes out with new services, one of the key things that comes out of our cost review is looking at whether you're, taking advantage of the latest, generation of instances or the latest technology that comes out that at the end of the day does, showcase cost savings.
Yeah.
Right. So a great example of it is, when you're running EBS volumes, GP3 has come out a little while back, which is significantly cheaper than GP2. So we're able to come through as part of our automation and flag those not just from a, what's running, but also from a cost optimization opportunity, as well as, things like, your database instances, And then also be able to have some conversations on just overall architecture, to be able to say, has there been a cost conversation when deciding whether to run something in a serverless manner versus on a EC2 instance?
Yep. And I love also how the pillars kind of weave together, right? So if we look at sustainability, that is connected to cost optimization in some ways, right? So that's really great. Let's talk about downtime. Let's talk about reliability.
That one is the one that everybody seems to want to almost think about as, well, we know it's going to be up, it's in the cloud,
Right.
right?
Yeah, by
But
default.
yeah, but as a part of the the shared responsibility model that you'll see, there are a lot of decisions that are made when when running in AWS that dictate what your reliability, what your uptime is going to be,
Mhm.
right? And one of the key things that comes out of that is that when we do these reviews, part of it is understanding what are your requirements, right? Like you said, not every application needs to be running. If it's a 9 to 5 shop, they don't need to be running 24/7, right?
Right.
They don't need to be available in the event of a disaster all the time, right? So understanding what those RTO, RPO objectives are, and understanding what are the architecture decisions, what are the technology decisions that can be made, heavily influences how well you align to the best practices defined in that pillar.
Gotcha.
So there's a mixture of things that we can scan in the environment to make sure, hey, do you have self-healing architecture? Do you have, infrastructure as code? Do you have things like that that we're able to do from a scan and from a technology standpoint? But some of these also turn into architecture conversations where, do you need this level of availability? And sometimes the conversation turns into, well, you designed this to be, 5 nines when the user base only uses it 8 to 5. So
Right.
this, these things may sometimes kind of weave back and forth, and so there's a cost component to be able to do that as well.
Yeah. So, just thinking about the fact that downtime, every minute of downtime has a cost to your business and,
Mhm.
really to your bottom line. So that's whether it's the cost may be financial, it could be reputational, right? So if you've got a mission critical workload that's out there running and supporting thousands of customers, the reputational risk that you run by
Mhm.
not focusing on this could be huge, right? So for these businesses that are heavily, heavily dependent on their cloud infrastructure, this could translate to thousands or millions of dollars, per incident. And
Uh-huh.
it's all about, what is the potential here? So do you have a potential of loss in these areas, and realizing that we've got some major, major potentials for losing out on customers, business, revenue. But we also have, if we focus on it properly, which a lot of our customers have found, focusing on that in advance and making sure you
Mhm.
plug those holes early provide you such a huge advantage. And that's why we're such a big fan of these reviews. And again, it's pretty low effort. A lot of our the people that we approach to do these things, based on the fact that we work with them, they've got AWS accounts and we recommend it. They're surprised at how little investment of time and dollars
Mhm.
to do in these things just to get a huge return on that time investment. So, um, what's some examples of things that we would look at in the reliability pillar of the well-architected framework? Do you have any clues as to what we look at that you can let us know about?
Yeah. So one of the key things we look at is around the services that are being used for that workload.
Mhm.
Oftentimes you'll see, there's services that you can leverage AWS managed services in a lot of areas, and that'll help increase your reliability because you've offloaded that responsibility for running in a very optimal and in a reliable manner to AWS. Versus something that is, that if there's a requirement for the application to run on your infrastructure on your EC2 instances, then we look at do you have the proper mechanisms from a auto scaling and from a responsiveness perspective to be able to make sure that things stay up, and then do you have the monitoring around it? So all of those are things that we're able to scan and look for. What alerts do you guys are looking at? What metrics are being tracked? Those are all questions that we ask, as well as things that we're able to look at as a part of the review, as part of our scans.
You talk about monitoring. That's something that I think we've talked about before, but just the opportunity there to do something really minor, a minor tweak to your your AWS account so that you can get that data quickly, right? And going back to cost optimization, a lot of people just don't know. They don't have the data because they haven't looked at it, or they just assume that something is running. If it's running, it needs to be running. Whereas we actually sit down for maybe a couple hours and review that with them and understand, oh, actually, there's a big savings opportunity there. So for reliability, same thing. If you can put some monitoring in place that could allow you to get that reporting back more quickly, then you can make sure that things are remediated more quickly, and it saves you a lot of time and money.
Exactly. And being able to take advantage of automation is critical within AWS. So being able to put in proper monitoring and being able to build automation around that monitoring is critical. Being able to detect, doing failovers in a seamless way.
And the way we approach our projects, so going outside of the well architected review, like that's the way that we approach things directly if we're doing new work, right? But the reality is we're not working with everybody in a development capacity. So, these things, these areas can be uncovered outside of some kind of a development relationship. Like we can come in and essentially offer you this guidance that again is, low cost, low time investment, but we can get that information to our clients quickly. And a lot of it has to do with the tooling that we use and then the trainings. Obviously, you've been doing this for, over a decade and you know how this goes, but, we've made ourselves more efficient over time based on the things that we've invested in, and we can turn things around pretty quickly, which is something that we're really proud of. So what's the difference between, let's say, performance efficiency, the next pillar, and what we just talked about?
So with reliability, we're talking about how much can we count on AWS in our environment to be up? Performant is, well, okay, it may be up and operational, but if it's taking 10 seconds for your web page to load, then it's not a very performant application, right? So performance comes back down to how efficient is the use of the services? Do we have the proper sizing? If you're running EC2 instances is a great example. If you have, a series of WAF rules, how much overhead are they providing to the web traffic? Using web applications as an example. Mm-hmm. So from a performance standpoint, we're really looking at it a little bit more granular, a little bit more, not necessarily is it up or not, but is it behaving is probably the best way to put it. Is your workload behaving as expected? And then are you able to really see when it's behaving outside of what's kind of the expected thresholds to take some corrective action before it goes down?
Gotcha. Okay. That's a great example earlier. Like if I'm on my phone and a website's taking more than a couple seconds to load, I'm really trying to get on to the next thing. It's just how we're conditioned, as a society, I feel like over time. And I think it was Google's web analytics, the things that they run show that 53% of mobile users will abandon a site that takes over 3 seconds to load. So, you may be turning people away, based on the low performance rating that your workloads have. So, it's something that you may not think of, every day, but it's something that should take some focus to make sure that you're running as you should be and your clients are being served properly. So really it's about business survival, right? It's not about bragging rights necessarily, but it's about like, let's survive and let's make sure that we put everything in place that we can. So areas that we can look at, right? So architectural choices, right? So places where we've maybe made choices in the past that are not as efficient or optimally efficient now. And going back to the fact that things change in the cloud very rapidly, right? So, every day on the AWS blog, you're seeing a new announcement about something, and they move extremely fast to the point to where you may not be able to keep up. And I will kind of plug this to the fact that we recommend doing well-architected reviews on your workloads more than one time. So it could actually be do one twice a year, because there may be opportunities that have come along that you can take advantage of that will dwarf the amount of time or investment that you put into the review. You'll get that back on the choice that you can make based on some new data or info that you get. So
absolutely. And a great one comes out of this is for our workloads that are network sensitive, right? It seems like
Sure.
every year or so, there's an update at least once a year that, a new service comes out that makes it so you can, connect to the AWS environment faster, or you
Mhm.
can, optimize it in certain ways. So there are different things out there that will increase the performance of your workload,
Mhm.
both from a responsiveness, but also, from a self-healing and an automation way. Different things are getting exposed from APIs that AWS is publishing that allows us to make sure that things stay performant. And being able to look at performance from a lens of machine learning, even to be able to take advantage of, well, when is something a anomaly, and taking advantage of anomaly detection, and not having to put in like set definitive parameters on what they need to be. So as AWS continues to evolve, they release more and more services that'll help us keep our workloads much more performant, and monitor them in an optimal way.
Yeah, it's not always about speed either. It's about staying ahead of your customers' expectations. What do they expect from you? What do they expect from the software that you build, or the things that they use? This is a big one. Next, where are we at, Anil? I know we've done a lot, but we've got two left. We've got sustainability, which we'll save for last, and then the one before that I think was help me out,
Operational.
operational
Operation.
excellence.
Yep.
Yeah, okay. Go for it, man.
So operational excellence is an interesting pillar because it takes into account um, not just the technology that you're working with within AWS, but how does it fit into the larger context of your business. A couple of key things that come out of that pillar are conversations around, well, how do requirements get funneled in, right? If you're as this workload continues to evolve, as you continue to build your presence in AWS, as new things come up, what is being considered as a part of that process? Is it just new features? Is compliance? Is security? Are all those things being funneled in as requirements? And then what type of alignment and support? So there's a big aspect of this pillar is talking about how does the overall business kind of get behind operating in AWS and operating in the cloud in general. And in addition to that, right, it's how are you taking advantage of best practices in being able to do things like access your AWS environment, and being able to do things like maintenance windows and updates, and being able to leverage scripting and tooling that's available within AWS to be able to identify um, some of that. So from an operational standpoint, this is one where, we've talked a little bit about reliability, and we talked a little bit about performance. This is, everything beyond that to say keeping the lights on, right? So if the application is working as expected, that's great. But if an issue comes up, who gets notified? How are you responding to that? So this is kind of the wrapper behind kind of all this to make sure that operationally you're sound.
Gotcha. So it's about keeping your organization up to speed with the things that are in your environment, and making sure that the right people are in the right spots in terms of response time, responsibility, things like that, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep. So
Awesome.
yep. Just go
You
ahead.
had one more thing. Go ahead.
I was just going to layer on that, from an operational standpoint, this is one where I've seen in my experience, um, sometimes gets overlooked by some customers, but is oftentimes the differentiating factor when looking at their competitors. And the reason for that is, I think everybody understands that, whatever workload, whatever applications are running in AWS need to be on, they need to be responsive, they need to be, performant. But I think everybody also understands that something will go wrong at some point. And operationally having that defined, having that, whether it's leadership buy-in, whether it's defined processes, whether it's defined people on who needs to be contacted, that 9 times out of 10, and probably more frequently than that, even becomes a differentiating factor for most customers, because you know everybody's everybody's they'll forgive if something goes wrong if it can get remediated quickly,
Right.
if they feel like they're being heard, if they feel like they know who to talk to, both internal customers and external customers.
Mhm.
So those organizations that have not really put emphasis on the operational excellence side of it are the ones who tend to struggle with things like day two operations, and tend to struggle with when things
What is
do. go.
What is day two operations, Anil?
So day two operations is basically, you've built this great new solution and you've gone live with it. And, everything was great on day one when you launched it, right? On day two, something goes wrong. Somebody forgot to configure something. Somebody, there's a ticket that needs to be created somewhere, or there's, feedback coming in and you need to know how to incorporate that. So day two operations really is how well are you being able to keep that kind of prestige of this new application that's gone live, that's, it's redundant, it's, highly available, everything is great on it. But then are you, actually taking advantage of the operational side of it and testing your backups? Are you, being able to fail over? Are you being able to know that, who's running your backups and who's going to be called in case there is slow time experience and a performance aggregation experience? So like we mentioned earlier, a lot of these things are kind of interwoven, but day two operations is really just that, is how do you make sure that application that is, just as good as when it was first created?
Gotcha. That's a really great explanation. Thank you.
Mhm.
All right. And everybody's favorite, sustainability.
So
Sorry about
sustainability is a bit of
new.
an
This is new to the last couple of years, something
yep.
like that. Yeah.
Yeah, this is new, and this was a lot of what this was actually meant for is as a part of AWS's wanting to be a little bit more just aware of the fact that, their data centers and their work, what they're running has an impact on the environment. And so
Right.
a lot of organizations have a sustainability element now as a part of their overall charter, right? They want to make sure that they have, they reduce, carbon emissions, or that they want to take advantage of the best services within AWS that utilize the least amount of computing power, for example, while still giving, meeting all the requirements that you need from that application. So this is a new pillar that kind of came about and said, okay, if you're running in a region, are you looking at the region to see, well, how saturated is that region? How many other customers are there? How sustainable is it that, capacity within this particular region is going to be, uh, sustained for an extended period of time? And knowing that, whatever you're using within that particular region, there's a consumption that you're now contributing to the use of that, of the utilization of that region. So there's this one is a little bit more of a aligning better to the overall mission of your organization and aligning better to the overall mission within AWS at times is to reduce emissions and to make sure that everything that we're using minimizes the impact that we have on these large data centers.
Gotcha. So being extremely responsible in that area has become a priority for AWS. And like you said, a lot of other customers, a lot of other businesses, or cloud computing companies. But it really does trickle down to their clients, such as us and our clients, to where we're trying to be conscious of how we deal in that area.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, so we've kind of gotten through all of the pillars. I kind of want to talk to our viewers about, and we'll have time for some questions here in a moment. I saw a couple came through in the chat, but what can our clients expect from a review in terms of what they receive?
Yeah. So what we do is like we mentioned, we do a scan of the environment. We have a conversation, about those scans, and then we come up with a list of remediation activities. So as a part of the review, we identify your high risk issues, and then as a part of a dashboard, what we're able to share is where are the findings as they align to each pillar, and what are some recommendations on remediation activities for each of those findings. In a lot of those cases, the remediation activity is we'll go in and fix whatever is configured incorrectly. But in some cases, the remediation activity sometimes needs to be a little bit larger, needs to be a little bit more strategic in nature, where it's may involve putting in a multi-account strategy, or something around identity and access management that sometimes requires a little bit more than just a click of a button. So we kind of help prioritize what those are and what has the most impact. So the goal is when we put together a list of remediation activities, it's not just a spreadsheet with what needs to be remediated. We try to contextualize it as what has the most impact to your organization, and what has the most impact to um, in terms of, making one change may, resolve multiple best practices.
Okay.
So that's one of the key things that we come back with.
So we have what do we call it? A prioritized remediation plan. And
Mhm.
talk to me about the different levels of priority that the well-architected framework refers to.
Yeah, so we'll have findings that have been kind of declared as critical, right? These are
Okay.
the ones that need to be addressed immediately that are, your super high risk issues. So the well-architected framework will define things as high risk and medium risk. We
Mhm.
take that a step further to say, okay, here's critical, which is your really, really high risk issues that are actively posing some sort of usually security threat to the organization.
Right.
Those are the ones that, as we come across, we funnel those over to you even before we complete the entire process, because those need to be evaluated and looked at immediately. The next ones are your high risk ones. These are everything that has the potential to impact your business from a disruption standpoint, as well as from a security and across every other pillar. Um, these are the ones that can potentially negatively impact whether your costs, whether your reputation, whether your operations, something along those lines. And then there's also there's always going to be a handful of medium and low risk, where these are ones that you may not be following best practices, or there are areas of improvement that can kind of push you to how do you continue to mature, continue to evolve. There's very few organizations I've seen where I've done a well-architected review where everything is a high risk all the time.
Right.
Everybody is trying to do something better, and we want to encourage that. We want to help them understand what is it that their next step needs to be as they continue to mature. So while remediation plays a big part of it, a lot of this is also understanding that there's some things that you're doing right and that you can continue to move on and mature on and to get to that next tier. So we want to kind of provide both aspects of it.
Gotcha. That's a great way to put it too. I love that. I've never heard that before. And it's also important to point out, I think, that these high risk issues, medium risk, critical, it's not necessarily based on what we think, right? So it's not subjective to our opinion. It's based on a framework within AWS called the Well Architected Framework.
Yep.
And we're able to get those insights without having to go through and provide our specific color to it. It's basically AWS saying, this is what we identified and this is what we think you should fix. And again, the critical issues we're going to funnel over um, to you. Again, you mentioned, like, even before we finish the review process, we may let them know, hey, you really need to address this. And that's the value that our customers can find from a review such as this, which is being able to get those insights quickly. Our process is fairly quick and efficient. It's very efficient based on the tooling and the trainings that we've done. But again, it's not subjective. It's not what Adam thinks or Anil thinks based on what they've done at the time. It's a great framework that we abide by, that provides this value to the customer. So, um, yeah,
Absolutely. And I think the most important thing to call out there is that the well-architected framework has these pillars. Within each pillar, they have a number of questions and a number of things that they ask about, and within each one are a series of established best practices. And this is something that AWS has gathered from over the entire time they've been in existence, which is why it continues to evolve. So these best practices are things that are very prescriptive in nature, in terms of this is how you should do things, right? And like all best practices, they'll apply in the overwhelming majority of the scenarios, right? There's always going to be a one or two scenarios that the best practices won't apply, and that's part of the reason we do these reviews the way we do them, is that we want to be able to understand that. Is that if there is a reason why a best practice is not being implemented, then that's perfectly fine as long as it's been considered. And so, but the severity and the criticality of these best practices is something that AWS has published as part of the well-architected framework. And so when we identify whether a best practice is being met or not, as a part of the review, that feeds into AWS's weighting and understanding of the system and the best practice, and kind of tells us where to focus our efforts from a criticality and a remediation.
gotcha. Okay, awesome. Do you have a screenshot or a screen share you can do of a review that we've done to share with our viewers?
Yeah, so I can share the dashboard that we provide. This is an executive level dashboard that we put together. And it basically details how all of our scans and all of the questions and that have come off, where an organization falls both across each pillar of the well-architected framework, as well as holistically, where you may lie and what your high-risk issues are.
Thanks. Let's go to, I see a couple questions here. I'll point out a couple of these out, and thank you all for asking this. So Mike asked, Anil, let's say you identify several high-risk items in our infrastructure. Are we obligated to fix everything at once? And how do we prioritize what to address first? We may have talked about that a little bit already and answered that question, but that was Mike's question.
Yeah, so it's very common to come across multiple high-risk issues. And part of what we do is when we do the what I call kind of rationalizing of those issues and prioritizing of those issues, we kind of put that up against what has the most business impact. So if there's something that's got the highest risk of a security vulnerability or an active threat that needs to be evaluated, right? We'll help prioritize those before. If there's quick wins that can be kind of remediated quickly, we'll prioritize those ahead of some of the things that may take a little bit longer to implement. So we help prioritize things and put it through those various lenses. So that kind of gives you a good picture of, what can we address immediately? What can we address in, 3 weeks? What can we address in 6 weeks? And what can we address beyond? So it kind of gives you a good idea of where things may fall.
Gotcha. So a roadmap is how we generally present it. Thanks, Mike. Let's see. Sarah asked, this all sounds good, but our dev team is already stretched pretty thin. How much time do we need to commit to this review process, and what kind of preparations do we need to do beforehand?
So, like Adam, like you had referred to earlier, we've, been able to leverage automation and scanning to be able to really reduce the time it takes. So when I started doing these well-architected reviews, years ago, it was a full day long process, with, about 10 to 20 people in a room going through a number of different aspects of it. We've shortened that down now to anywhere from a 2 to 4 hour process. And the beauty of it, so to speak, is that, we don't necessarily need your entire development team involved in this particular, in that scenario. The goal is to have people who can speak to the various aspects of things, but we've already done a significant amount of scanning of the environment to be able to get a good understanding of the baseline. So when we're coming into these interviews and talking, we're talking more so about overall strategy and, overall objectives and, what are the thought processes and what was considered. So we don't necessarily need to know why a specific resource was configured a specific way. We know it's there. So this helps kind of really shorten the process and continues kind of give the insight, but we've been able to take advantage of a lot of the automation tools that are out there to really make that process much faster than what it used to be.
Cool. Hope that helps, Sarah. Let's see, John, we have a healthcare startup. We've had consultants look at our AWS infrastructure before, but it was mostly generic advice. How is this review different? And can you give us a specific example of a quick win that you found for others?
Sure. So you're right. There's a lot of assessments available out there. And a lot of times what they'll do is, they will just kind of tell you the best practices that, hey, you don't meet this best practice. Here's the best practice. Part of the reasons we do our well-architected reviews the way we do them is because we understand that not every best practice is going to apply to every single person. And just knowing the best practice is not oftentimes insightful enough, right? But understanding how do you actually implement a best practice based on your current org model, right? So if you're using, a team full of developers versus a team full of DevOps engineers versus a offshore team for development, your process on implementing these best practices is going to differ. And so one of the reasons we come and talk to you specifically about this is so that we understand when we tell you to implement a best practice, it's about how do you implement the best practice based on your current needs and your current requirements. As far as an example goes is, we mentioned this earlier, as we're doing the scans of the environment, we will flag things that, that, hey, you have a public S3 bucket. And so it even goes a little step further than that, where it's not just public, but it may be, hey, it's open to to all authenticated users, right? That's a common loophole. That's a common security gap, that it doesn't register as public when you look at, the console, but it is open to all authenticated users. So anybody with an AWS account can read that S3 bucket. That's one that we're able to identify very quickly, and we're able to bring that up to be able to say, is this really what you were, trying to accomplish here? And so it kind of kickstarts that conversation. All right, we don't try to come into these reviews with the notion of, well, this is what you're doing right, this is what you're doing wrong. It's more so, this is what we're seeing. Does this align with what you were expecting to achieve?
Thank you. It's a great answer. And thanks for the question, John. We're going to kind of wrap things up here very shortly. We're running to our time limit. And thank you again to everybody who's joined. Before we go, I did want to mention two things. First of all, we are offering well-architected reviews for the time being on a complimentary basis. We won't do this all the time, but we've got some incentives from AWS to provide this value to our customers. They've been a great partner to work with, and we're glad to be a part of the program. So I'll put the information down on the bottom of the screen so that y'all can see where to go for that. It doesn't really matter where you're at with your workloads. We recommend that folks do a well-architected review. Second of all, we want to let you know that AWS provides an incentive to folks to do well-architected reviews. And that is depending on how many high-risk issues that you identify and remediate, you can be eligible for credits to your AWS account. So it could be in the thousands of dollars, depending on what you remediate. It could offset the cost of a review if you do it with someone else. Again, we're doing it complimentary. So just keep in mind that there is an incentive for you to do that. Thank you for your time today. Anil, thanks for sharing your expertise with us and everybody. And we look forward to working with some of you, hopefully in the future, to help you make your workloads more well-architected and fit better in a stance that will protect you and keep your businesses running optimally. Thanks, everybody. Have a good day.
Thank you.